Thank you, Liz. Well done. So, Dr. Holmes, I think, calls this an effortless process of spiritual realization. And that's precisely what a mystic experiences, this effortless process. But it's not effortless for most people. Most people have to really work at that feeling of unity. Because most people are pretty conflicted, because most people live on the surface. They don't live deep within themselves in a deep, abiding sense of unity with all life. I remember when I was first starting in this philosophy, when it was first suggested to me that there was this thing that God was, and it was everywhere. There was no place where it wasn't. And that was new information for me personally. I had never really ever considered the fact that God, to me, God was always living in Santa Barbara or something like that. You know, always living in some place called heaven, sort of exclusive from humanity, if that indeed was what God was. But what mystics do, and what this teaching did for me personally, was it actually began to language things which I knew internally and intuitively, but I had no way to describe to myself. That's why teachers are so important, because teachers help you language things so that you can finally hear yourself and hear the truth. Because one of the things that St. Teresa says, one of her famous sayings is that many people are not affirming the truth. As a matter of fact, she says, never affirm anything unless you're sure it's true. So it's amazing to me how many times people would affirm a truth that would be self-deprecating or diminishing of their own sense of their own presence in the world. Like, I must be a horrible person, or what kind of fool am I? Maybe that's a song that goes with it. So it's like this whole sort of self-indulgence is really a mistake in many people's minds, because we tend to romanticize the pain. And so if the pain is more romantic to us, then at least it seems to be more bearable. And so thus we have a lot of torch songs in the world as a result of that. But when you move away from that, and you move into a clearer understanding that what you're dealing with is a power that doesn't know you as something separate from itself. And that might be new information for many of you here, that there's a power that created you that can't possibly know you as something separate from itself. As if God could think of you as imperfect. Impossible for God to do that. Now, you might walk away from God, but God never walks away from you. God is always there, manifesting whatever you believe. And that's perhaps the greatest statement of truth with respect to the idea of freedom. Because real freedom is being able to make every mistake possible. And learning from it. And then the consciousness of making those mistakes, and then being able to correct your own way of thinking. And not only correct your way of thinking, but correct the way your life is moving. So people like St. Teresa of Avila was crucial and central, especially to the Catholic Church in the 16th century, because that was the period of what we call the Reformation. And the Reformation was not an easy period for a lot of people in Europe. Because if you weren't Catholic, there was a good chance you would be killed. And Marianne Williamson, who's speaking at the conference, has made the comment that over 60% of the people killed in the Reformation were women. And they were typically the wise women of the village, who weren't necessarily attached to a religion, but had a deep spiritual connection to a power greater than them. So the tendency is sometimes to kill the messenger because they may not look like you, or to castigate the messenger because they don't sound like you. So a mystic is a person who goes so deep into their ever-present sense of life that they unify with something where no differences are existing in existence. They see only perfection, they see only God. That's why Teresa, when she would come back from these interior states of awareness, she would always say that there is only perfection in you, and if there's something imperfect, then it's simply because you have a misunderstanding of who you really are. As a matter of fact, she did say something else here, which was very interesting. She said, never compare one person with another. Comparisons are odious. And I say, the only sin is comparison. It's when you stand in comparison to other people that you in fact run the risk of thinking of yourself as better than somebody or less than somebody. So at the surface, this shows up as a great deal of pressure and confusion in people's lives. That's why mystics are so important, because they go deep into the abiding presence of this unity of life, and they emerge with information. But teachers language that information in a compatible fashion so it can be digested by people. So when I got into this teaching, I was pretty much living on the surface of my life, trying very, very difficult to make an impression upon the world with what I did and how I did it. And sometimes I would have to force my way into things. Or am I the only one that's ever had to do that? So like forcing your way, the tendency is you tend to push out, push out, push out. You kind of force your way into life, and then all this pressure is on you to perform. And so you have to sustain all this like performance and drama. And eventually you get exhausted and you collapse. And when you collapse, it means that you've surrendered. And at that moment, you're in the position to actually have a transformation. Now, I teach a certain form of meditation that I developed over the last 15, 20 years. And the first step in this form of meditation that I teach people is the importance of your breath. Unless you're paying attention to your breathing, the tendency is you're not paying attention to the one singular thing that connects you with the world, which is your breath. It is the one singular thing which connects you with the entire planet. It's something that has you breathing in the molecules of others and transforming those molecules inside of you as they come back out into the world. So the technique that I teach is, of course, begins with the American Sign Language for God, which is putting your hand right here at the heart chakra and taking a deep breath, letting the air out, and then letting God take the next breath. Which I think is a fascinating experience, because when I tell people to do that in my classes, they'll often say, well, what if God doesn't take the next breath? I said, well, then you'll fall over and start breathing, and then God can finally take the next breath because you've lost consciousness. So, of course, God will take the next breath. But the interesting thing is, when people are waiting for God to do this, they're thinking to themselves, will God? Won't God? Will God? And all of a sudden they start breathing, and before you know it, they're taking air in, they're letting air out, they're taking air in, they're letting air out. Now, I have people do this, but I add one more step to this, which is attaching the idea of a principle into the mix, so that when you start breathing in, you're breathing in a principle such as love, or peace, or joy, or beauty, whichever you choose, and you're breathing out that principle. Now, as you do that, you're consciously then transforming those molecules that go into your lungs into something that now has a message as it goes out from you. And I'm sure that many of you have experienced when you've been in a certain situation where there's a lot of people in fear. Does that fear tend to spread amongst other people? And pretty soon that fear creates what we call in our society a mob mentality. But those who have this vestige of being centered and being able to breathe in love and breathe out love, and they've practiced this, they can actually go in and literally transform an entire room, because love casts out all fear. If you're in perfect love, you cast out all fear. But a lot of people have a hard time staying in love, and they have a hard time staying in love because there's sort of this parental voice within them that says, well, maybe it's not real. Maybe it's not real. And when that parental voice comes in and it starts to judge you or other people, it tends to fire out from some parental point of view. And everybody who's been subject to that kind of condescending speech knows that you feel instantly like a child, like you're being punished. And you don't even know why you're being punished. And then that tends to make you want to fire right back with your parental voice. And what we have then is what we call cross-communication. That's where people cannot communicate because they've crossed up. They've got their parents arguing with each other. Have you ever watched parents argue? Does anybody ever win? Nobody wins in parental arguments. All that is established is who's going to be the more alpha, who's going to be the more person in charge. And so there is another way of looking at this, whereas the adult within you begins to speak to the adult within that person. And when you speak as an adult rather than a parent or a child, what happens is the person begins to hear a different voice. That's what mystics bring up from this deep abiding presence, they bring up this adult voice of love. An adult voice of love, committed to love, totally expressing love, manifesting love, and being the presence of love itself. And in that presence, in that genius of being love, it literally transforms the entire room, transforms the entire conversation. I've personally witnessed this, where people have been talking, and I've asked them to speak as adults, and the whole conversation changes. And that's where you have forgiveness. That's where forgiveness enters the picture. I talked about that last week. This week I want to talk about compassion and understanding. Because one of the things that's sometimes really hard to understand, or hard to get to, is the ability to turn off the analytical, judgmental side of your thinking. Or am I the only one that ever has that problem? So that judgmental side comes in and immediately shuts down the possibility of going into a deeper expression with God. But before we go any further than that, I want to just try this little experiment, just to give you a technique that can center you with breath. So you're going to sweep your hand up and breathe in and breathe out and put your hand right here. And then you're going to let, as soon as the breath ends, you're going to wait and let God take the next breath. And take the word love and breathe in love and breathe out love. Do it 3 times. Here we go. Now, 2 things are noticeable in this exercise. You can feel a shift in the energy in the room. First, I can. Secondly is, you can also feel your own resistance to letting God breathe you. The tendency is, I got this, God. I'll take over my own breathing. What if you were in charge of your breathing? You wouldn't be here. That's why God made breathing automatic, because he knew we couldn't handle it. But if we consciously take a breath and let God take the next breath, we immediately start this mystical tie to this power, which is a presence within each of us, which is wanting to emerge. Now, in this exercise that I do, and you can go to our website because I have a video there that takes you through the entire series of movements. But it starts off like this. You bring your senses together, so everything you hear, see, taste, touch, and smell is spiritualized. You put your hands under your chin, you spiritualize your heart moving to your mind. And then this next move is very interesting because it's this. So take your hands and put them together like this and push out like this, like you're really trying to make something happen in your life. Come on, look like you're trying to make something. Come on, look tough. I want you to look tough, tougher. I'm important. You get it? This is me. Now relax. Now get tougher. Now relax. Now get tougher. This is what you do all day long. You see, I witness you all doing this in various ways of doing it. You walk in, you meet somebody. This is my tough side. Want to get to know me? You got to get past this. It's like, come on. And then you relax, and somebody catches you off guard. Oh, that's not me. That's not really me. I'm this tough guy, just tough person. So when you're dealing with this kind of experience, the tendency is people get exhausted. Then they come to me and they say, why am I so exhausted? It's because it takes so much energy to maintain your toughness, to maintain this image. And if you would just relax, and I have put your hands together like this, and rather than push out horizontally, turn your hands so they can go vertically. And let yourself go deeper into love and higher into expectancy. Expectancy. I love that word. It's one of my favorite words. You can put your hands down. Okay, put your hands down. Just expectancy is so different than expectation. Expectations are tough guy stuff. I have an expectation for you. You better meet these parameters or we're going to smack you. We're going to get you. So that's expectation. Expectancy is now. The highest and the best is emerging from you right now. And it doesn't matter how many mistakes you make because you are the presence of this deep and abiding love rising into a higher sense of yourself. And I believe in you. and I trust you, and I have faith in you, because I know the power that's in you is in me. When you come to a relationship with that kind of sense of yourself, what happens? The relationship transforms instantaneously. It just transforms. Because your sense of acceptance of the other person is not based on how well they do anything. It's based on the something within them as an intelligence more powerful that's expressing and manifesting and growing. And all their mistakes are just experiences being pushed out of the way. All those emotions that come up where they say the nasty things. Have you ever said things this week that you want to have back? Yeah. Well, that's just that emotion is just pushing aside all the negativity so the perfect love can emerge. And when it emerges, it's fantastic. Now, Carolyn Meese is an author who wrote a book about St. Teresa of Avila, on a book that she wrote called The Interior Castle. So St. Teresa didn't want to write books, but the Catholic diocese said, you're really good at explaining this stuff. And when she started to write, she realized she had a gift, and the gift needed to be given. But how many of you in this room refuse to give your gifts because you don't think you're adequate? So I'm telling you right now, you're adequate to the task. It doesn't make any difference how good or bad something is at the beginning. If you keep working at it, what happens? You get better, and you get better. Sometimes people come to me and they say, I want to write a book. I said, well, how many books are you going to write? Well, I have one good book. And I said, no, you don't. You ever made waffles? Anybody ever made waffles in this room? Is the first waffle any good? Neither is the first book. Now, I know that's probably discouraging to some of you, but it's the second, third, fourth, and fifth books that you're writing. That's what happens. You get better at what you do. So nobody writes just one song, and nobody writes just one book. What you do is that you have a series of evolving experiences which lift you into a higher expression because you were willing to have the courage to take the step in the direction of what was seeking to emerge from within you. But if you didn't take that step, you would begin to feel the pressure to try and make it happen on the surface, and it never works. It never works, because all you do is get exhausted at this level. But when you do this, it opens up your heart, opens up your energy, and you begin to emerge in an effortless fashion. But how will you know till you try? Now let's take relationships for this thing. Could you be a better lover? Is it possible you could? Raise your hand if you could be a better lover. Raise your hand if you're the world's greatest lover. Raise your hand if you're the world's greatest lover, but you could be better. So, if you're thinking of yourself in terms of a mystic, you got to think of yourself in terms as a lover of humanity, of all kinds of people, so that everybody's welcome in your presence. Nobody feels your judgment. Nobody feels your analysis because you're not trying to judge and analyze people. Instead, you are receiving them for exactly who they are. Now, I'll tell you a little story that I've shared before in the past, but it's so perfect in this situation. When I was teaching school in San Juan Capistrano back in the 70s, I had a principal who was particularly not a nice person. If you're a teacher, you know the kind of principal I'm talking about. At least I wasn't having a positive experience with this person. And one time, we had been given all these extra kids and extra duties, and then we were being told that we had to stay after school and do even more work to try and call parents. And it was just exhausting. We had this is in a middle school, no prep period, no time to do this except on our own time. And so I was the teacher's rep, go figure. And so I raised my hand at the faculty meeting and I said, we don't have time to make those phone calls. And he said, you will make those phone calls. Just like his little finger came out and started pointing at me and pointing at everybody else. And then I said, well, maybe we won't. Well, the next day he called me into his office. Now I'm sitting in his office, or should I say I walk into his office, and he's got a couch. He says, sit on the couch. The minute I sat on the couch, I realized it was a setup because the couch was really loose and I fell back down and my feet practically went straight up in the air. He pulls his chair over and begins to tell me that I'll never say this and never do that and blah, 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 and I'm trying to get out of the couch. And I can't get out of the couch. Finally I get up and I storm out of his office. It wasn't a pleasant sight. So then I went to see my minister. Last thing you know, minister in San Juan Capistrano. since retired. I said, Leslie, what am I going to do about this guy? I hate him. I can't stand him. And he said, you have to learn to love him. Are you kidding? I can't love him. He's really big. I told him what he did. He said, making a difference. We got to pray for him. Pray for him? Oh, man, are you kidding? He said, no, I'm not kidding. We've got to learn how to pray for him. Okay. So Leslie wrote out a prayer, and he made me write out a prayer. He said, you got to say this prayer 5 times a day. Read it to yourself. Okay, I'll do it. But I wasn't enthusiastic. So I did it. 2 weeks later, this principal calls us into his office, all the faculty, and he says, I have some news for you. I've just been promoted to assistant superintendent. And I'm leaving. I went, praise God. Prayer works. That's a true story. And I went back to my minister and I said, I'm amazed. Prayer works. Now I was just taking classes. I didn't have this conviction that if you pray, things change. Because it never occurred to me. Carolyn Meese, in her book on the interior castle about St. Teresa of Avila, she tells of her experience of talking to a guy who said, I can't meditate and I can't do contemplative prayer because I've got ADD. We have an animal at home that has DDD. That's doggy deficit disorder. And she said to the person, well, have you ever asked God for help? No. Because I thought you had to get into this strange trance before you could ask for help. He said, no, you could ask for help right now. And he did. Everything changed. Almost instantaneously. He said, God, I need some help here. I really need help. And everything shifted. I mean, everything. And I've witnessed it in my own life, and I've witnessed it in the life of so many of you. And I know that you know prayer works, but sometimes we're a little stubborn. We won't utilize it. We won't ask for a prayer. We won't go back there and write down something, light a candle, and put it there and walk away. And know that prayer work is going to be done for you. This is crucially important for your own sense of well-being and your own sense of happiness, because you will never be happy until you learn to trust God. I'll say that again. You will never learn to be happy until you learn to trust God. All of this motion will not make you happy. It might make you look impressive. It might make you feel good temporarily, but only this motion will give you the deep satisfaction that you're seeking. Jesus said it a little differently. He says, that's a well. When you drink from it, you will never thirst again. You have the potential for compassion. You have the potential for understanding, but you got to get past the judgment of the analytical mind. You got to put that puppy away. Don't let that dog out of the kennel. Instead, you go right to that mind that's connected perfectly with God, and you start to know the best and the highest for the person who's acting the worst in your life. I'll say that again. You know the best and the highest for the person who's acting the worst in your life. And at that moment, guess who's going to change? Not them. You. Because the only mind that has to be changed is your mind. Thank you.